Have a warm welcome to Steve Diorio and Alan Pease. And I would like to start with a short introduction of ourselves. So please shoot, Tony.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having us. I'm Tony Pace. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Marketing Accountability Standards Board, which marketing accountability is actually not an oxymoron. It's something that's very close to our hearts. And across our work over the years, I have had the very good fortune of getting to know and work with Steve Diorio. Steve is with Forbes as a very senior analyst and very prolific writer about the topic of marketing accountability. So, we're the proverbial brothers from another mother because we both like the marketing issue. And as part of our journey on this whole thing together, Steve has actually been named a MASB fellow because across the MASB organization, we thought Steve brought an awful lot to the dialogue and the continuing pursuit of marketing accountability. So, Steve, thanks for doing the fellow job, and why don't you add to your introduction that I've already given you?
Thank you. We have built a strong partnership with Forbes, which allows the academics, experts, and practitioners within the Marketing Accountability Standards Board to interact with a broader cross-section of CMOs as well as analytics leads and chief financial officers from many of the leading brands to expand this conversation, which we think is starting to accelerate and make an impact.
So one of the outcomes of the collaboration that we have with Forbes and with Steve's good work is we published something earlier this year called Carpe brand. So some of my academic friends have chided me that not everybody studies Latin anymore. So Carpe brand is like Carpe diem. Carpe diem is, of course, seize the day. And Carpe brand is an exhortation to marketers to seize the brand conversation. And part of the reason for that is, I think if you talk to most marketers and they were to distill what their job function is, they would say it's to build the business and to build the brand. Now, when it comes to the business, there are an awful lot of metrics that people are very knowledgeable about and can speak to. But when it comes to the brand, that's kind of a vague thing. And when you talk about the subject of brand value, people say, well, you really can't value a brand. Well, the interesting thing from our viewpoint is the International Standards Organization, ISO, has time with the efforts of MASB worked to develop standards on brand valuation and even more recently on brand evaluation. And only this past June actually announced the unanimous passage of ISO 20671, which requires that all brands be valued on an annual basis, and included in that evaluation is the valuation. And that's created an awful lot of conversation about should I do that and why that's actually important. And collaborating with Steve, we've done a number of things over the years, talking about the marketing value chain and talking about brand value. And what we were hoping to do today is maybe outline that a little bit so people understood this somewhat complex, but when you really boil it down, very, very important topic. So, Steve, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the marketing value chain, and then we can jump into brand value.
Yeah, Tony makes a great point. The reason that brand value is important is it's a financial asset, like inventory, real estate, or marketable securities. Yet all three of those are reflected and updated, most importantly, on the financial statements for investors every year. The brand, which is larger in most cases than all of those, is not valued or reported as a financial asset. And in a world where most or much of firm value in terms of stock price is intangible assets, understanding and quantifying the value of this brand is increasingly important to investors as they try to make rational resource allocation and growth investment decisions. So we are excited by the notion that not only is there transparent math that can help us calculate a financial value of the brand, but there's this impetus to update it every year. Does it go up? Does it go down? Are we doing a good job destroying value in reports. And so the evaluation component that Tony talks about is critically important. Tony mentioned something called the marketing value chain. We've laid out this math. All it is making transparent the financial equation that connects marketing investments and actions to firm value and financial performance in a way that senior financial leaders and investors can understand why the brand is driving future cash flow. This math is, I guess, outlined in the brand evaluation standard. It's understandable, but it's never been transparent because of the nature of the business. Some people think brand valuation is a secret art that smart investors use to arbitrage investment opportunities. Others, provided view that it's IP that they can't share for their consulting businesses. Our belief is that the more business and financial leaders understand the mathematical equation that connects marketing investment to share price, the smarter growth decisions and resource allocation decisions will be made. We can talk more about the equation. It's documented in our report, but just like the Black-Scholes model for option pricing theory or other methods of calculating price, this is rational, financial valid, and a CFO will understand it. And I think the last part of that sentence is probably the most important.
So one of the things that we have heard quite often as we've gone around and talked to people about the ISO standard is, wow, ISO is really they're the world standard setter, and all my people in engineering and science and product development, they abide by ISO because they're the rule. Gee, I didn't know ISO had something to do with marketing. Well, as far as we know, the two standards that I referenced, the ISO 20671 as well as 10668, which was on brand valuation a few years back, those are the only marketing standards that they've actually developed and promulgated. And we refer to the new standard as the golden ticket because essentially we think it empowers anybody within the C-suite, but certainly marketers, to come in and say, we use ISO for all these other disciplines within our organization. Why wouldn't we use and apply this to marketing? And in so doing, the marketers have a method whereby their efforts to build the brand can be quantified over time. Now, there are plenty of, well, yeah, but conversations that happen about this, whereby people say, those numbers are soft, or they're highly divergent depending upon which methodology or which outside company you use to do that. I think it's important to remember that even numbers like inventory on a balance sheet are not necessarily precise numbers. They're estimated numbers. And if you think of cost of goods sold, we're all familiar with the fact that the cost of the goods sold could be based on, FIFO, first in, first out, LIFO, last in, first out, or some sort of average cost method. You're going to get multiple numbers there. So from our viewpoint, even if you just want to use it for internal purposes and not for publicly reported purposes, what you're trying to do with brand value is get a measure and then measure the change over time. Everybody, of course, is going to be interested in what the absolute number is, but it's really the delta on that number over time that gives you a sense of what's happening and whether or not you're actually adding to your asset base. Now, another curiosity in our journey of conversations about brand value is the fact that even some of the largest brands in this country, meaning the United States, don't appear to be measuring their brands now, even for internal purposes. Steve and I conducted a brand value briefing earlier this year with names that you would recognize. We mentioned to them, and we're keeping to that we're not actually divulging their names, but none of the folks in the room indicated that they currently measure their brand even for internal purposes. Now, clearly they do, because there are a number of organizations that are highly successful that have models, that have clients that use those models, But the fact of the matter is there's not public dissemination of that information.
So who should be the main sponsors then in the management of a company to make sure that the brand is valuated and evaluated and measured?
Well, so to me, the issue is a CEO or perhaps even a board level issue, right? I had the good fortune earlier this year of hearing Hugh Johnson, the CFO of PepsiCo, speak around the 50th anniversary of the Effie Awards, and he talked about the fact that when it comes down to it, the value of their business is more tied to the value of the brands, which is why they were increasing their marketing spend, because they want to drive those brands. There's lots of things you can do in the short term, but long term, it's the value of the brands. So, to me, it is a C-suite or maybe even board level issue. And the complicated thing about brand value in general is if you look at kind of the highest but even most simplest level, if brand value is a key driver of enterprise value, isn't that material and shouldn't that be reported on? Now, we've had lengthy debates within MASB about this. I referred to some of my very esteemed colleagues as balance sheet hawks, meaning that they want brands reported on the balance sheet. I think that's a little bit too complex. And our official MASB position, which I don't see changing, is we want people just to value their brands. How they choose to report it is really their issue. It would be certainly a good thing for it to be in the notes. But if most brands aren't even valuing themselves right now internally, we need to take, small steps first. And that first small step would be, for their own purposes, assess the value of their brand.
So maybe, Steve, there's a lot of data and research and market research involved in getting the evaluation of the brand. Is there a return on investment on the valuation and evaluation of your branding?
That's a great question. I'm glad you wrote that question. Every organization spends thousands, if not millions, of dollars on market research. On top of that, or as a substitute, organizations are looking for digital technology to provide additional insights through first-party, second-party, and third-party data into the consumer. So any organization in a workshop that I'm in is spending millions of dollars on what they ostensibly call market research already. So this money is being spent, and I throw customer analytics investment into this pot. People are measuring, but to what end? Our point by saying that the only measure of marketing success is firm value or financial performance in terms of future profits and cash flow suggests that any market research being done by the organization should conform to an equation that ultimately ends up with profit growth, share price growth, and future cash flow. Let me expound. Any way that you calculate value, the brand only creates value to the degree that it modifies behavior in 8 different ways. It's an oversimplification, but it's a rigorous one. Our brand only has value to the degree that people choose more, buy faster, refer more, or pay more, and variants of that. If a brand does not let you win more, support price premiums, gain share of wallet, mind share, whatever with the distributors, whatever it is, it's not creating value. So it asks the fundamental question: if I'm doing market research on likes, eyeballs, brand awareness, the question I ask is that research telling me, are they buying more? Are they paying more? Are they buying faster? Are they referring more? Those are the only 8 things I care about. So my point to you would be market research spend should only support those measures. And our experience is there's a lot of market research being done that supports measures that are not connected to financial value. So I think the discipline of brand valuation brings focus to that investment, which I believe a lot of it is wasted, and also creates an operating metric for me to evaluate a brand manager or a product manager in a financially valid way that allows the CFO to say, this person grew the brand, this person didn't grow the brand. We'll talk about write-downs and write-offs where brands like Kraft and Gillette are eroding in value to the tune of billions of dollars. If I'm a manager involved in that business, I want operating measures that allow me to mitigate that or reverse that trend. And so my broad point to your question would be any investment in marketing research, and I will throw in now marketing analytics and marketing technology, should add up to some financially valid metric. And I think our focus on the marketing value chain and brand valuation and firm value as the only scorecard of marketing takes that investment and applies it towards operating metrics and measures that are actually going to help the organization. Without that, I think there's a lot of fake or non-rigorous market research, and that MASB is in the business of certifying this. You want to expand on that?
Yeah, so there's been an explosion in the number of services that are out there that are applying technology to get at certain numbers which they would warrant as being valuable in assessing the marketing value received. There are some very good services out there. There's also some things that are not very, very well proven. One of the things we do at MASB, which I think has been very helpful, is we have a measurement metric audit protocol whereby we see inside the black box and we understand whether or not something is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And in the world that we live in, where everything changes so fast, it's good to have an independent assessment of those kind of things, and you can say, yes, this does actually do what it's supposed to do, by folks who are, have no financial interest in the circumstance. Because, frankly, the great thing about technology is you can imagine a lot of things and build a lot of things. The question is it of value to the marketer? And right now, the sale of those things sometimes precedes the validation of the metric as being valuable. I wanted to go back to your comment about Gillette and Kraft and just make a little bit of a reference there, since we went through it a little bit quickly. My own personal take is that Gillette didn't have a brand problem. Gillette had a pricing problem. If you go to a CVS or a Walgreens and somebody's got to go get a key so that they can go behind the glass case to get you the $30 set of cartridges to replace, and your perceptual opponent is Dollar Shave Club. Gee, a Dollar Shave Club sounds a lot more attractive from a cost standpoint than $30 for some replacement cartridges. I think that's a pricing issue. Now, Dollar Shave Club doesn't necessarily cost $1, of course. I think the issue with Kraft Heinz is a little bit different. It appeared, as from an outsider, from the publicly available information, that they were not investing in their brands. Zero-based budgeting can be a great tool when you actually come up with a budget for stuff that actually works and support brands. But when that's a air cover for not supporting brands at all, it's a different kind of circumstance. But I think both of those circumstances with well-known, well-respected entities point to the fact that, if they had valued those brands in the intervening years, what would the values have been over time? Would you have gotten to a circumstance where they said, hey, we need to invest in our brands, or we need to protect our brands, or maybe make our pricing a little bit more attractive, so you didn't have $8 billion or continuing multi-billion-dollar write-downs, in the case of Kraft Heinz. If that discussion about brand value was happening on a regular basis as part of the brand evaluation process, as the ISO standard said, would you have been able to remedy those circumstances in a productive way for the current shareholders? I think at least that conversation would happen, which is the first step in potentially addressing something.
So the ISO method is, of course, a major step forward in brand evaluation and evaluation. But how can owners and investors be sure about the value as part of the company value of a brand value?
Well, I think that's where you get to the valuation methodology that you would choose to engage. Steve and I talked an awful lot about, so how is this going to play out over time? I I think the very pragmatic advice that I've been giving to people is, well, if you're just starting out on this process, what you're probably going to want to do is survey the field of providers. Maybe bring in, several of them. I would say at least 3 of them. See which of their methodologies lines up most with the way your business to operate, and then have them do an exercise where they come back to you with what they think the answer is. And I, personally, my recommendation is to have people pay for that and then decide which one to engage and go forward with it. Some people concurrently are going to come up with their own internal methodology, which is the whole piece that we put together in terms of Carpe brand and even the marketing value chain. Talking about value as it pertains to marketing, if you're only talking about cost, you're really not going to get to the brand building kind of stuff. Because how do you distinguish between, which activities are yielding the best marketing return? So, I don't think this is not like go get one number and then kind of, wipe your hands and say, hey, we did the number, we have it, it seems okay, or we don't really like it. This has got to be an ongoing piece of what your annual brand assessment and planning process is.
So since you've mentioned the marketing value chain, can you tell us a bit where the accountability of brand management comes in the value chain?
Yeah, so the value chain is a 5-point equation. And it's very simple causal chain of effects that starts with what the brand manager owns: the marketing mix, the 4 Ps, pricing, placement, and the promotion product. But it also includes owned, earned, and paid media. Owned channels are now digital channels, content, where people are spending a ton of money. Analytics is now 8% of the marketing budget. Marketing technology, delivery of ads is a big part of the budget. So we believe in a large managed portfolio of investments that is largely directed by the brand manager. So if I have an investment portfolio with 20 elements in it that is as complex as that being run by a financial advisor or a hedge fund manager, I now have the objective of what am I trying to do? I'm trying to build brand value. I'm doing that to support a strategy of shelf space, of winning, of choice, whether that choice is in a retail environment, in search, or another environment, referrals, if it's a digital model, price premium, if I'm in a luxury brand environment where brands are over half the value of the firm, velocity, frequency of purchase, whatever my brand is doing. If I'm a major consultancy, I want to get and win RFPs. I want to charge $100 an hour more than my competition for the same services. So there's an implied strategy to what that brand investment is going to deliver. And that strategy will deliver very concise financial metrics. I want to editorialize and say one of the reasons MASB exists and one of the fundamental problems in marketing relative to finance, IT, and real estate is precision of metrics. When we say market share, there's a concise definition of that. When we say brand preference, there's only one way to calculate brand preference. However, those terms are not only used in a very undisciplined fashion, but then they're used to drive research that has no meaning. So if there is a brand strategy that drives price premium and choice, I should see that manifest in financial metrics like share and product margin. Once my chief financial officer has those numbers, running a cash flow, profit forecast, firm valuation is a relatively trivial exercise. So what we're doing is we're connecting the domain of the brand manager, the full marketing mix, not just paid media, but also that owned media infrastructure, people, social listening, content, technology. We're including all marketing actions, promotion, product, placement. If pricing happened to be the problem for Gillette because they didn't adapt to a DTC model, that's the problem that the brand manager has, as Tony pointed out. And our metrics should have pointed that out, that they needed to evolve their pricing strategy as the shelf moved from the store to online. They may have had to evolve their packaging to more of a subscription model in order to remain relevant. So whatever action was necessary was the domain of the brand manager, and the equation we're talking about, marketing investment drives brand strength drives customer behavior, whether it's price premiums or velocity of purchase, that drives share growth and option value, that drives firm financial performance. That's a very straightforward way of managing and evaluating how well a brand manager is doing with their investment portfolio, long-term and short-term. So it's a long-winded answer, but I would argue the marketing value chain provides a financially valid and operational metric to evaluate how well a brand manager is doing in their job. And progressive chief marketing officers are starting to use these principles in their annual reviews of brand managers.
So the other thing that I'd like to add, and Steve referenced this earlier in terms of growing your customer base, our good friend and the very esteemed professor from Wharton, Jerry Wind, brought this up at the MASB Summer Summit in Chicago a couple months ago. The metrics on your customer audience are very, very important. And if you have noticed the financial reporting, especially around the early stage of developmental technology companies, and even now you're starting to see it on the streaming services because of the battle going on there, the question is, how many customers do you have? How many are continuing customers, and what is their usage? So the size of your customer base is probably an easier conversation to have when it gets to the marketing value being derived. The curious thing about that, though, is everybody wants to use averages, right? So people say, well, what's a customer worth? Or what's a like worth on Facebook? Well, there's a big distribution of various values there, depending upon the frequency and the size of purchase that customer base makes. And you can, of course, segment that. But the measurement of that, I think, is frankly, that may be a way into the brand value discussion, because that's already naturally being done by some organizations, and perhaps they're picking a metric that puts them in the best light relative to their competitive set, but at least that conversation is happening because people know that has an awful lot to do with the valuation of those companies, whether or not they're able to attract and keep customers and grow that base and grow the value that they're receiving from those customers over time.
Okay. Well, as you said, this is all about companies that are measuring their brand value and evaluating their brand value. Are there any blocking assumptions or blocking beliefs why companies are not yet investing in measuring their brand value and evaluating it?
Well, not to be too cheeky about it, but I think in the investor relations space, especially, and in the accounting space, they don't want to deviate from what has been historically done, right? So to me, the standard is if something's material, it should be reported upon, right? I would say it's now pretty accepted practice that if a senior executive has got a health issue, that's going to be discussed because that's seen as potentially influencing what happens in the organization going forward. I would say in like fashion, anything having to do with the brand and anything to do with the size of the customer base, those things to me are also material, and really don't get many arguments about that. The second block there is, well, we can't really do that because those numbers are soft or they're all over the place. I think that's a pretty superficial argument, especially when you're talking about the change over time, right? Unfortunately, all of the firms that are expert in brand valuation have found that it's a successful public relations strategy to put out a list with values on it. Now, privately, they'll tell you that list is really to generate conversation about their firm and the topic of brand value, and they will tell you that if they go into a company and they have better information, their number is going to be that much more precise. But there have been many discussions, Steve shared one with me that happened recently where somebody talked about the valuations or I think it was Apple being, all over the place. There were 3 different valuations that range from, 40 billion to 120 billion or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but they were all over the lot from the different companies. The fact of the matter is that's going to happen when you're using publicly available data and you have different models to value certain circumstances that pertain to the brand. To me, that's kind of noise, and you need to get beyond that. And the whole notion that something is difficult doesn't mean it's not a worthy endeavor to be done, right? And, we have a lot of computing power available to us, and we have a lot of pretty simple equations. To me, it's an effort that you're probably going to get better at over time, but it's something that I think anybody who has brands as a core part of their business strategy, and I think that's virtually everybody, should be making an effort to try to determine this value. And frankly, the people that have had continuing conversations with us, it's heartening to hear the progress that they're making on that topic.
So thank you for that one. But Stephen, you organize with Forbes a lot of gatherings with CMOs. So how open are marketing managers, brand managers, management teams about evaluation and evaluation of their brand?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you answered that. One of the 4 precepts of marketing is segmentation, as Tony pointed out. There is no average CMO. But the value of Forbes is that they can create a forum where senior marketing executives can get together and have an honest conversation about management issues. Marketing accountability being the number one issue they care about. That said, CMOs vary in acumen and willingness to explore this. There is very low maturity across most chief marketing officers on the notion of proving the value of the brand. Some executives would say that I can prove the value of my marketing investment in terms of short-term attribution. Anything I cannot prove goes into the brand building classification. Others believe that long-term brand investment is valuable and can prove it empirically. To answer your question, CMOs are very, very open to discussing it, but the vocabulary and the acumen varies dramatically. Some are just struggling with the notion of what this is. Others are a lot more sophisticated, and there's a group who have a fear of finding out. They mouth the words, but quite frankly, they don't have confidence either, and they don't really want to unpack those numbers to see whether long-term brand value is a myth or something that's actually valuable. So there's all sorts of perspectives out there. I would summarize it by saying overall, maturity in terms of their ability to quantifiably discuss this is relatively low.
Yeah, I would add to that by saying the top-notch CMOs know this is an issue, but there are a number of countervailing factors in the marketplace. Our good friend Greg Welch and Spencer Stewart, they publish every year a document about the tenure of CMOs, and it went up from 20-something months to 30-something months, since the Great Recession. But now it's kind of going. I think it got into the 40s, but it seems to be backsliding right now. I think that the CMO position turns over about as frequently as most coaches or managers of Major League Sports franchises here in the U.S. So a big long-term issue like measuring the brand, where there is no standard that's been adopted, is probably not on the front of the plate in terms of most CMOs, even the best CMOs. The second piece in that is, that people are relatedly kind of fearful of adding, another metric to be evaluated by. And to borrow a phrase kind of from some of my old colleagues at McCann Erickson, there are a lot of people in marketing who aren't really sure they believe that marketing does what it's supposed to do, right? So it's kind of the atheist being in charge of the church kind of thing, right? they've been in marketing. They've done it for a long time. They've seen the model to move ahead, but they're not sure it's going to be able to deliver on all the promises that are out there. So I think all of those things weigh against this being adopted because it's a longer term kind of piece that, in the short term world that we live in, is not going to get the attention of all the things that require immediate action and immediate, teamwork against.
So, do you have a clue about the average percentage, or just an estimate percentage of the Fortune 500 companies that are measuring their brand value?
Well, I don't have necessarily a representative sample, but based on the conversations that we've had broadly and individually over the course of the last, 4 or 5 months, I would say that it's probably less than 1 in 5, maybe even less than 1 in 10. Again, that's not a full done survey, but that's a plenty of conversations with pretty smart folks, broadly and narrowly.
I would echo Tony. Let's say a broad estimate of under 10%. And the criteria I would use there was, did they fund a formal brand evaluation study? Are they reporting, like several MASB members, the value of the brand in notes on their financial statements or the contribution of marketing? Do they have an internal model that they are using to value and update brands, for example, through M&A or through integration? So if you add up those conditions, that this is a company who's investing in valuing brand, I'd say under 10%, maybe generously under 20%, as Tony points out.
So do you consider the ISO method, which has been developed by MASB and Forbes, actually to be something just for the large companies, the multinationals, or is it also for mid-sized companies, national companies?
So to me, the methodology, because it's kind of a meta methodology, really is for anybody. I mean, it's for a small and emerging brand versus a house of brands with many brands inside it. A brand orientation means you're thinking about your business long term. Unfortunately, the nature of capitalism now is such that everybody's focused on the very, very, very short term, right? There's been some discussion as to whether or not, quarterly earnings and the requirement that you do earnings on a quarterly basis, whether that skews the focus to short term. I think that's probably true, right? And, everybody's talking about emerging, startup companies and which round of financing they're on. That's all about what the short-term status is, right? So hyper short-termism is the nature of how we work right now, but it's not necessarily the right thing for businesses in the long term. And if you really want to get people thinking like owners, okay, they need to think about the brand for today and tomorrow and next week and next month and, much longer time frames going out to 4, 5, 10 years, right? So that orientation really, to me, belongs to any kind of business. I won't say that it's easier in a smaller business, but when you have people behaving like owners, I think they value the brand even more so.
Yeah, I'll echo Tony's point. The brand is a long-term view. And second, I want to color this in that I think, to your question, this discipline of valuing the brand is relevant to every size business, whether it's a local loyal company who is the trusted member of the community, whether it's an A-round technology startup. If you look at the activity that a technology startup does, they're fighting hard for PR, getting on Gartner Group lists, getting their name out there, sponsorships. That's a big part of the mix because they realize that
Endorse me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, but so whether it's an A-round technology startup, I would argue most of their investment goes towards getting nameplate customers to reinforce their brand or getting their name out there. A locally owned hardware store or oil company who is trusted, family-owned, been around for 20 years. Those are long-term thinking people. They make good decisions around the long-term equity of their brand, as well as as I mentioned, any brand manager or any organization who's using media has to win support, whether it's win choice, whether it's on the shelf, on an Alexa device, in search. I think it's a relevant discipline to almost anybody who believes that there is long-term latent equity in their business.
You can make an argument that the social media platforms require every business to now think like a brand, right? Because when somebody says best hardware advice near me, right? Whether they're clicking that on their phone or they're saying, Alexa, who can give me good advice on how to replace this door? The brand name is the thing that you want to come up, whether you're John's Hardware or whether you're Home Depot. And everybody's got to think like a brand, which is why I think all long-term brand thinking has got to be near the forefront for any business that wants to be successful over a significant period of time.
Okay, thanks. So, what are the most important market conditions that influence brand value and the evaluation process?
Well, I'm not sure, Michel, this is exactly your question, but one of the things that I worry about as a marketer is generally across the world we have exceedingly low interest rates right now, right?
Yeah.
You've got negative interest rates, which some of us never thought we would see in our lifetimes in some markets around the globe. If you're valuing a brand via a discounted cash flow model, the brand is, even if the cash flows are identical, the brand value you're getting today is higher because of the very low interest rates. So does that mean if that changes over time, you should not value your brand? That's the part of the equation which becomes complicated, right? So speaking very pragmatically, a brand could do many good things which help it grow over an extended period of time. But if interest rates go up from their perhaps unnaturally low state that they're in right now, that's not necessarily going to be reflected in the brand value. So I think people need to, A, understand that, and B, that's why other metrics like brand preference need to be prominently mentioned, at least in internal conversations, about how does our brand stand today and tomorrow.
Building upon that, if you look at economic measures of growth, whether it's by industry or the overall economy, that's a bit of a double-edged sword. Industries that are desperate for organic growth, ultimately the investor conversation has to circle around long-term investment in the brand. Organic growth numbers that organizations put out to Wall Street need to be supported by a brand strategy that drives that. Conversely, if and when there's a downturn, there's enormous pressure to cut. And in the absence of brand value, marketing is viewed as an expense that can be cut. And so it's interesting to see what happens in a downturn. Is this viewed as fundamental bedrock investment to support the value of my firm, or is marketing a discretionary expense that can be cut to make my margin numbers in a bad economy? So those are other economic factors that I think play.
Yeah.
But if you had a brand value, right? So let's say a brand is valued at $1.2 billion. To me, it's a different conversation when you're talking with your finance people, your procurement people, your CFO. I have a $1.2 billion asset, and you're telling me not to protect and grow that this year? That's a different conversation than there's this expense, right? So when you look at brands as assets which need protection and development, I think it's a different funding conversation than I need to cut all these expenses.
I mean, you said the right word, asset.
Yeah, okay. So there's one question that's still triggering me. I mean, why MASB is involved in that is clear because it's in the name, the Market Accountability Standard. But how come that Forbes got involved in the accountability of marketing, and why is Forbes supporting CMOs on this?
I made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
So Forbes is a media company, but their most valuable asset is the executive audiences. They can attract CFOs, CIOs, and marketers. And the CEO of Forbes decided to make a conscious investment in their most valuable assets. Forbes runs the CMO Summit, and Forbes commissioned the Marketing Accountability Initiative to deliver more value to their most valued constituent. So what we are doing in partnership with MASB is to deliver deeper research and resources to Forbes' valuable customers. We didn't pick marketing accountability out of thin air. We surveyed CMOs, and proving the value of marketing to the business was the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 issue on their mind. And we pulled this think tank together, this forums, in order to address that issue at a much more meaningful level. And so that's a shift by Forbes, but I think it's one that CMOs in particular appreciate because they get the depth that they're looking for beyond validation that they're good folks.
So if I could just add to that, Michiel, there was a good thought and discussion process about Forbes and MASB collaborating on this issue. We were thrilled to be able to collaborate with Forbes because Forbes has long been a thought leader on many issues in the business space. My business life, Forbes has always been at the forefront of many of these discussions, and it was natural for us to be associated with them. And it's we're happy to have done so and to be continuing to do so.
Okay.
So if I can give a 20-second pitch for the Marketing Accountability Standards Board.
Yes, please do so. Yeah.
In a nutshell, MASB is a jewel of an organization which has many highly regarded academic leaders as part of our membership. We're thrilled to have them. We also have leading marketers as well as leading measurement companies as part of MASB, and we also have individuals that have joined us. So we're always looking for good members. I don't have the intellectual property rights to this, but if you want to think about MASB in a nutshell, we kind of think, and hopefully we're not saying this with our chest puffed out too far, we kind of think of ourselves as the marketing Menses of the world. So if you are one or on your road to becoming one, you should be joining us. And you'll get the ability to have these kind of conversations, Michiel, as you've experienced on a regular basis. So we very much thank you for having us today, and be happy to do something like this again in the future if the circumstances warrant.
Well, thank you too for being with us. And I've also put in the chat the link to the World Standard Week, and you're kicked out of the room, as I see. And also put a link in there to the finance and marketing videos, which are posted by MASB as well.
Right.
And to everybody's interest high in the accountability of marketing, and especially, of course, the evaluation and evaluation of brands. So thank you very much for being with us, and we'll see each other at another occasion. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Speak with you soon.
Okay.